Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The rising prospect Martin Bakole has been stopped in his tracks, stopped in the 10th round by Michael Hunter at the York Hall in the UK. This was an upset result, really upset the apple cart here, Hunter did, in what was a really fun fight. It was a bit all over the place at times, but in the end, Hunter outworked Bakole. He might have looked a bit wild and ragged at times, but he put it on Bakole, and Bakole didn't have an answer. And there was real drama towards the end of the fight when Bakole became injured in the 8th round, some sort of upper arm or shoulder injury. So I'll quickly go through this fight. First couple of rounds, it was a real firefight. Hunter came out and it was just all guns blazing. He was just swinging for the fences, really trying to put it on Bakole. And Bakole, for the most part, was weathering the storm. He was getting away some of his work, but Hunter was having the better of the action. And through the sort of rounds 3, 4, 5, it looked like Bakole was trying to time Hunter, trying to counter him. But Hunter, with his movement, and this was key for Hunter in the fight, was able to evade most of Bakole's work. And it looked like Bakole was being patient, letting Michael Hunter sort of gas himself out a bit. But in the end, he just wasn't throwing enough. He wasn't doing enough to win rounds. And by the time it got to the 6th round, Hunter, while he had slowed down some, was doing enough to keep moving, to keep evading shots. And Bakole's trainer, Billy Nelson, said to him after the 6th round, "Look, Martin, you have to win these next 4 rounds. You are losing the fight. You actually have to throw some punches." And in between rounds of one of the rounds, he said, "Why aren't you throwing punches? You didn't throw your right hand enough. You need to tell me, why aren't you throwing punches?" And really the answer to that one was Michael Hunter. He might have been a bit wild and ragged sort of with his movement, and he was really just sort of flailing at times. But he was doing enough to, and hitting Bakole enough to actually get his respect. So Bakole couldn't just walk through his punches because he didn't like necessarily what he was getting tagged with. And he was getting tagged a lot. There was a lot of shots landing, and Bakole's defense, it wasn't great in this fight. Michael Hunter was having severe success throughout the fight. But it wasn't just that. Bakole looked a bit slow and ponderous on his feet. He was patient and he was looking for his opportunities, but by the time the fight started to get away from him, he started to show a bit more desperation, but then he got injured in the 8th round. And at the end of that round, he didn't want to carry on. And his trainer, Billy Nelson, said, "Look, if you don't go out there and fight, you can't be a champion. You have to get out there, Martin. You have to keep fighting." But Bakole, he wanted to quit. He didn't want to continue. The problem was so bad that in the 9th round, he really wasn't throwing much of anything with the right hand. I think he threw one right hand. And I think it was at this point, anyone who was watching that fight knew that it was going to go just one way. Michael Hunter was either going to get a stoppage or more likely he was going to finish it on points. But in the 10th round, he hurt Bakole, and that started off a procession of punches. It really was just raining down on Martin Bakole. And Michael Hunter stops Martin Bakole. He stops the sort of hype train that had been building behind Bakole. And full credit to Michael Hunter, because it was quite the game plan. Really, he just came out swinging. It was quite wild and ragged stuff, as I mentioned. But he did start falling back on his boxing as the fight wore on. His movement was one of the key things that got him this victory tonight. And I sort of said on Twitter during the fight, if Hunter slows down and stops moving, he could be in trouble here. But he was able to keep it up for most of the fight. He did get hit a couple of times flush, and there was once or twice where he did look like, he sort of felt the power of Bakole's punches and maybe was a bit buzzed or got rocked to some extent. But he was able to sort of get out of those situations, use the ring, use his movement to sort of evade Bakole and evade what was following up. There wasn't enough action from Bakole. He got out-hustled, he got outworked by Michael Hunter. And the result in the end, arm injury aside, it was going to be a Michael Hunter win. Bakole, he was clearly down on the cards, and he wasn't going to win that fight without a knockout. Quite a way for Michael Hunter to announce himself to the heavyweight division. And if you want to see the stoppage itself, I do have that up on my Twitter at the moment, boxing_squared. So a very good way for Michael Hunter, who's trained by Hasim Rahman, to announce himself to the division. Heading into this, he had the one loss, and that was at cruiserweight, and that was to Alexander Usyk. So you look at that and go, well, this win over Bakole, that kind of puts the win that Usyk got over Hunter into perspective. Probably makes Usyk's win look pretty good now, because Hunter, he was a little bit sloppy in there, a bit wild and a bit ragged, but he was very, very effective. And he was outworking Bakole to the jab, beating him to the punch almost every single time. And for Bakole, it's a bit of a rebuild job now. And Billy Nelson was trying to coax him during the fight to give him more, show him more, use that jab, let his hands go, sort of put it on Hunter a bit more. But for whatever reason, he held back at times, and through some of those mid-rounds, he wasn't really throwing much of anything of note, and Hunter was collecting the rounds, and he was clearly going to get a decision if Bakole didn't stop him, but that didn't happen. So for Bakole, a very disappointing loss. And I think some of the sort of buzz and the hype that has surrounded him in 2018, well, that's going to sort of slough away now. And people will be asking themselves, how far can Martin Bakole go in the division? But he is still young, he can still develop, and he can still progress. It wasn't his best fight plan tonight. He didn't really execute. He looked a bit slow, a bit lumbering. He kind of weighted himself to a standstill, didn't throw enough punches. And he was called on that by his trainer, Billy Nelson. So it'll be interesting to see what Martin Bakole does now. And I said before the fight, this was a heat check for both fighters, because Hunter, obviously having been down at cruiserweight, he'd fought for a world title against Alexander Usyk, a bit of an unknown quantity at heavyweight. How could he foot it in the heavyweight division? So it was a gamble, this fight, for both guys. A clear step up for Martin Bakole, who hadn't fought anyone of the caliber of Michael Hunter previous to this. In the end, it was a step too far, and it was a canny game plan by Michael Hunter. Put it on Bakole early on, get his respect. Then he fell back on his boxing for the most part. He was still a bit wild and ragged at times, but it was effective stuff. And Bakole, he's got to tighten up on that defense, because he was getting hit almost at will. The overhand right, the left hook, it was landing almost every time that Michael Hunter was throwing it. So yeah, there's a lot to work on for Martin Bakole. And Michael Hunter, the question now is, how far can he go in the division? Because obviously this is a sort of performance that has announced himself to the division. A lot of people will be talking about this. And if you do want to see that stoppage again, go check it out on my Twitter, boxing_squared. What did you make of it all? It really was a fun fight. Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.